All right, thanks, Mike. It's good to be back, everyone. So this is a great topic that Toby's going to cover. So Dr. Tobi West, she is a tenured full-time faculty member of cybersecurity and computer information systems at Coastline College in Southern California, and her talk is going to be about evaluating CAE cybersecurity career outcomes, which she did a paper on. So Toby, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you. We'll monitor the chat for any questions.
Thank you. If I could start sharing, that would be awesome.
Uh, Where do I stop? Sorry, Toby, they've changed my button. Share settings.
Do you
Oh,
want to?
here we go. There
Okay,
you go.
thanks. Let's see if it'll let me get over there. Is it showing you the slideshow?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, it says my share is paused. So let's see what happens when I try to go to the next slide. We'll take it from there when we get there. So hi everyone. I'm Tobi West. I teach full time, like Stephen Miller mentioned. I teach full time at Coastline College in Southern California. I am presenting to you though from Las Vegas. So the entertainment capital, right? I've been teaching full time at Coastline for about 10 years. I'm going on my 11th year. I'm also department chair of computer and cyber sciences. So I have a lot of involvement in our curriculum, and this study helped me to kind of see what I might want to change about my curriculum and to see how I could better help students and support what they're trying to achieve with their cybersecurity careers in the future. So there is an entire report that this is based on. So if you're looking for that, we'll be sharing the link in the chat at the end, I believe. But then if Mike wouldn't mind putting the link to these slides, if you'd like to have that sooner, there is the link to the report at the end of the slide. So if you want to jump ahead to grab that and make sure you bookmark it out. But essentially, I have been teaching and trying to understand cybersecurity careers and the outcomes that students experience at the community college in all of higher ed and those pathways through from K-12 through to us in higher ed. So I am also the founder of Cybertech West, which is the company that I basically do my consulting through. And then this was a project that NCyTE commissioned we started this in 2024. So let's see if my system will let me. Yes, it let me jump ahead. Awesome. So a few of the topics that we'll go over today, and sorry, I'll move my film strip around or my video strip around a little bit, and sometimes it gets in the way of my slides. So let me try to get that going. So we'll go over the introduction, like why did we do this report in the first place? How did some of it come to pass? And then the methodology for how we conducted the study. How did we get the information that I'll be sharing with you today? What are those employment outcomes of the information that we collected from students? And then the certifications, that's including their extracurricular and post-program activities that they did, the students that we'll be talking about today, and that program impact. What was the effect of the academic program on their employment? And then there are some concluding remarks about how the study flowed and some things that maybe if there were any limitations and future research. For those of you that are not familiar with the research studies, we often talk about the scope and how it may be limited by certain factors. So we'll talk about those along the way. And then this is the NSF award that this was based on.
I don't think we are seeing your slides move.
That's what I wondered because it does say it's paused, but I don't really know why it's paused. Let's see. Maybe if I stop and start again, I might not be able to put it into presentation mode. That might be what its challenge is. So let's see if I go back and share again.
That's a different slide now. So we're seeing,
Right. Okay, good. Then I'll just stay in this mode if that doesn't bother you all. And rather than trying to go into the share mode, it doesn't seem to like that. So this is what I was just saying. So so these are the topics of our talk for today. So, a little background, we just heard about Dr. Sands, and so Kareen Sandy from Whatcom and John Sands from Moraine Valley originally did a study on this in 2019, so before COVID, and currently there are 514,359 job openings in cybersecurity. I started these slides last year when the study was completed, and that same number was still on the CyberSeek website today. So if Mike wants to throw that CyberSeek link into the chat, that would be awesome. CyberSeek is an amazing website that you can see the total number of job openings in the cybersecurity workforce, and they update it regularly, usually about every 6 months. I'm seeing the same number, so I'm not sure about their last update date. You can go to their About Us. But what I really like about CyberSeek for you students is that you can see the pathways and you can see entries. So if you're already working in technology, let's say, you can see those entry points, and then you can see the job flow to see, like, hey, where do I want to go in 5 years? Or let's say you came into this realm and you're like, I heard about pen testing first, or I heard about offensive security first. You can go look ahead at what those intermediate and advanced level jobs are in that area, and you can set your trajectory towards those. So this talk is all about the outcomes of students who've already completed programs, but maybe some of you mentioned that you're currently students and maybe you're midway in your point, right? Maybe you're in a master's or something like that. But this CyberSeek is a phenomenal website that you can go to and map out your future career and then sort of backtrack, and it tells you all of the skills and certifications you might need and things. And it's what it is a total scrape of everything from across the nation of all the job openings, and they look at job openings continually and they put that information, collect it up and package that information so you can look and see kind of what job titles are that you could search for that are related, because as we know in cyber, there isn't just one cybersecurity analyst or a senior or a junior or whatever like that. It's not that simplified. They're all over the place, and industry calls them all sorts of different names. So go to CyberSeek, check that out. But that's where this workforce need number is from. And so the 2019 study that Kareen and John did focused mainly on community college alumni, and that was their complete focus. And they wanted to know, where are they now after they graduated? That was their whole intent, is what cybersecurity job are they in? What certifications have they achieved? And so that information is also on the NCyTE website for the 2019 study. And that's how this study repeated. So we started in 2024, 5 year later, to kind of see where are students now. But for this study, we didn't only focus on community college alumni. We wanted to do a broader look at what's going on with students all the way from associate degree through their doctorate and how their outcomes have gone. So what we did is we contacted the 480 centers of academic excellence, and we said, hey, point of contact, which is usually a faculty member like myself, can you please get in touch with your alumni, talk to the alumni, and have them complete this study so that we can have the information that is from your students who've already completed. At the time, there were 52 work roles from the NIST framework that we focused on, and I'll talk more about how those work roles played a factor. But for you students who are not familiar with the NIST framework and the work roles, these are really awesome ways to identify different skills and tasks, because NIST has put all of this together for you to understand what those skills, tasks, and knowledge are that are needed behind a work role. So a work role isn't a job. It's a little bit different. Work role is sort of like when you hear somebody say, oh, I wear many hats at work, right? Like I teach, but I also do many other things. Work roles are all of those different things that somebody might do. So there are clusters of work roles that somebody might do at a job, and because all jobs are different, industries are different. People might have a different collection of work roles. So these work roles don't match up necessarily with what you'll see as jobs on CyberSeek. Why do we keep talking about cybersecurity? Why do we keep having, this discussion about what outcomes, what's happening? Is that in 2024, $16.6 billion in cyber attacks. That's an amazing, ridiculous number, right? We keep trying to mitigate this, and we just talked about AI and how it's integrated in everything. Well, obviously, AI is integrated in cyber. So for those of you just starting in cyber, you get to now not only have cybersecurity as part of your learning, but you get to have AI as well. AI is being used by adversaries. So AI is being leveraged to conduct attacks. And if you're looking at the news at all related to cyber, you'll see this thread throughout. But we're also using on the defensive side, if you're part of that defensive side, depending on which direction you go with your cybersecurity career. But this is why we just keep talking about it. The number evolves for the workforce need, that keeps changing, but this number in the billions of dollars keeps increasing. We aren't seeing really that number going back down. From a perspective of questions, I'm happy to answer questions along the way. So Mike, if you see something that I should answer along the way, sometimes in context is better than waiting until the end. So let me know if you see something, and I'll try to watch for any private chat. But for those of you sending me a specific question, it might be a little bit harder for me to see that during my talk. So send me email, feel free. I'll have my email at the very end. So if you have something for me specific, or if you want to send it to Mike to ask me, that's great too.
No questions yet, Toby.
Yeah, I have some that are direct to me, so sorry I can't answer those at this time. It'll be hard for me to watch the flow at the same time. So this is not in the study, but I wanted to share it, and I think it's especially relevant for the students here and the faculty who may be looking at plans if you have your upcoming semester. Mine starts on January 31st, so I still got a little bit of time to think about how my classes will be set up. But for those of you who've already set up your classes, maybe you can introduce this in some way. What I did was kind of ask ChatGPT, hey, what are all the things that make up a cybersecurity employment formula? Because I do all of these things, but where do I need to put extra emphasis, or where do I need to help students see it? Because many of you come into the point of knowledge is what you're seeking, right? You're looking for education, principles, core concepts, but you're not really looking at the bigger picture yet when you start, potentially. And some people self-study and they're really phenomenal about these things because they've already maybe started a career or something in the past, but you come in seeking knowledge. You don't maybe know yet that you need practical experience through hands-on labs or on-the-job training. And some programs are very conceptual or theoretical and don't always have that practical experience component, but it is very necessary in cyber. Additionally, professional development, certifications, continuous learning, and networking, these will be threaded throughout a cybersecurity career. This doesn't stop. This isn't something that, oh, I graduated, I'm done, I've achieved these goals. And by certification, I mean industry certification. So this is outside of the classroom. This might come from CompTIA, ISC2, ISACA, whatever commission you're looking at or organization to get certification from. When I taught at Cal Poly Pomona, which is, they have a bachelor's and master's options, I was having students come out and they're saying, I can't get a job. I'm graduating, maybe this semester, or I've already graduated, and I can't get a job even with a bachelor's. And at that point, they were seeing that A+ certification was what was needed just to get an entry-level help desk job. So take that into consideration, that if you're focused solely on the knowledge component, this will not be sufficient to reach and achieve a goal of entry-level position in cyber unless you're exceptional about networking and have maybe some super person in your life that can help you get that entry-level job and then help you figure out that you need the rest of these components. So people skills as a faculty, We're hoping to thread these into our class, hoping that communication will occur through team projects or through competitions and other things. So students, if you have not looked at this component for yourself, I highly recommend doing something like a Myers-Briggs. If you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, go do sort of a self-test. What kind of person am I? Where do I need to build my skills? Then go look at CyberSeek and see what skills it's wanting too. And so Myers-Briggs is going to kind of be, are you an introvert, extrovert sort of type of test? And it's just interesting as you're thinking through those questions, what kind of person am I? Where do I fit on the team? What should I change or improve about myself to be part of the team in a new way to achieve the job I want? And then doing that strategic planning, defining goals, targeted skill development. Some of that targeted skill development will come from what you do with your knowledge component, that academic journey. But you can also look at CyberSeek to see what skills it says you should go for. And in your, as let's say, education plan is what we call it at our school. In your education plan, your counselor might say, hey, take, Cyber 101, Cyber 230, CIS 157. These are all classes at Coastline, sorry. But take these certain classes, right? And then in your plans, you can also say, hey, I'm going to play in National Cyber League, or I'm going to, this semester, I'm going to build a home lab or something like that. So you each semester define your goals towards all of these components, as opposed to simply focusing only on the classes that a counselor might send to you. So this came after, but I still think that it's completely relevant with an outcomes talk because our students were doing all of these things in the cybersecurity formula to get to the goal that they achieved in their outcomes. So moving forward with what's in the report, some of this key data, we'll talk about their employment status, what the numbers from their employment status, and then what job roles. So remember, I called them work roles from the NIST framework. What are those work roles that the students had already had as outcomes? And what sectors? This is all at the end of the report. The sectors, if you want to look at the appendix of the report, it has an amazing list so you can see what industries our students had as outcomes from CAE schools. And then certifications. What certifications did students achieve during their program and then after their program? It's pretty interesting to see the differences. And then what was the impact? What was their perception of their academic preparation? How did that impact their ability to get a job in cybersecurity or technology? So I will pause here to see if there were any questions in the chat. Thank you, Mike, for putting that link in there. So what I had hoped to achieve with this is that institutions through faculty or others in administration reading this, strengthening curriculum, looking to see in the broader community what's happening with cybersecurity, then assessing their own program to compare and contrast, see if there are any gaps, see if there's anything that they would like to do that they're seeing as trends of cybersecurity outcomes, anything to change about their curriculum to help achieve similar goals if they'd like to, or maybe they look at the NIST framework and say, hey, people aren't helping in the CAE community with these certain work roles, or these are at the top. I don't need to focus my curriculum on those because other schools are already doing that, right? So you can look at it from two directions. You could look at it to say, these are already top work roles that are being handled by other schools. I don't need to do that, or I should follow that trend or go the opposite direction. What is missing and how can I help to achieve new curriculum in this space? And then aligning with industry needs. So if these are the outcomes and work roles that students are currently in, then industry needs these work roles, obviously. And then better supporting current and future students. If you're pursuing these cybersecurity careers, you can look at what certifications are top during the program and after and say, okay, I'm going to take my approach to either do those ones that are the after program ones and say, hey, I need those during my program so I can be better prepared for the workforce sooner. And then what it does is highlight those trends, those skill gaps, and then obviously continuous improvement in the centers of academic excellence is a very big deal. If for those of you who don't know, that is one of the components to apply to be a center of academic excellence. And then every 5 years, we re-up that annually. We actually have to talk about our continuous improvement as well. But every 5 years, we reapply to be a center of academic excellence. So it isn't a one and done, and you get to just, behave however you want. You have to keep with that continuous improvement. And that is something I worked with John Sands on many, many years ago, way before COVID even, to make sure that continuous improvement was woven throughout the application process. So how was this study designed? For those of you in a PhD program, you might know this term, nested sample. The way this works is it wasn't sent out simply to the broader community and say, hey, cybersecurity alumni, please fill this out. We went through CAEs, as I mentioned, the 480 institutions, to try to reach specifically cybersecurity alumni from CAE schools. I did also put it on LinkedIn and then vetted to make sure that they were CAE school graduates once I got down that road, because we wanted to make sure we got to everybody, but it's still considered a nested sample that I reach out to the points of contact first. And then that's how I was able to reach the 281 alumni. So for the remainder of the data that I'll share from this point forward, I'll just let you know that there were not 281 responses to every question. So when you're seeing the percentages, it isn't always a percentage of 281, because 281 students didn't finish the entire survey, and some people skipped questions, even required questions. They kind of just went over different areas. From the beginning, we started with interviews. So I do have some experiences with the students, very similar to John Sands and Kareen's study from 2019, where they interviewed 88 students. Initially, we interviewed 42 students, and then we moved on to an online survey, mostly because interviews people weren't interested in interviewing as much, and we really wanted to get a bigger sample. So 42 interviews for community college alumni, and then that's when we broadened it and shifted the scope from associate degree only all the way through to PhD. And maybe some of you know that the two-year schools are also offering bachelor's degrees. So that's what made this transition make more sense, is that the scope of community colleges also shifted. So we figured, okay, let's find out what everyone's doing. As far as participation across the United States, this is what we saw. And we had, if you look at the color coding range, that 3 to 1 there is showing you that the darker states, California, Texas, and others here, those states offered three or more institutions in their state. And those that are in gray, like Alaska, those states did not have any participation from CAE institutions. If you look at the CyberSeek map, the heat map, you'll see that the density of the heat map of responses here is very similar to the heat map of jobs in cyber. Kind of makes sense that there are more CAEs and responses from alumni because you have more density of cybersecurity jobs. So kind of just something that's an interesting trend there as well. There were 24 states represented, 36 different centers of academic excellence. And of those 36 centers of academic excellence, 3 certificate programs from two-year colleges, 20 associate degrees from two-year colleges, 10 bachelor's degrees. So that's a combination of two-year schools that are normally two-year degrees, but state schools, maybe they're called. And then the combination of universities for the bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees. And I believe it was 1 PhD program that was represented. From a diversity perspective, you'll see that some of these you'll probably question and go, well, hey, why don't these numbers always add up to 100%? Well, like I said, there were some students that didn't participate, and how we approached certain numbers was unique to that. If you look at the trends again for cybersecurity, you'll recognize that there is a gap in female participation in cybersecurity jobs. Well, also gender gap here. So we have that 15% female, 57% male, and we see this in industry as well. So many skipped this question. And so the difference here is that the question was skipped versus all of the questions skipped. So out of the 281, sometimes they didn't even complete the entire study, just their name. And then in some, they skipped just this question. This was definitely an optional question. So who knows what the remainder of that the gender gap might have been. From the alumni's racial ethnic identity, this was taken to align with what was at the time, the way government segmented out ethnicity and identity. So you were seeing these different percentages. We did have many Hawaiians respond, but they were not native Hawaiians. So we did have a lot of Hawaii responses, just happened to not be in that ethnic background. In my study, if you look at my dissertation study, very similar study I completed in 2023 under Dakota State University. I should have mentioned my background. Sorry, I completely skipped that at the beginning since we had that slide issue. But if you look, there were Hawaiian natives that responded that time. So that percentage was much higher than industry, interestingly. But these are probably very similar to industry trends at the time. So we'll move forward. What was the level of education achieved? So I talked about the different associate degrees, the numbers and things. And so some students achieved at their community college and their university had achieved multiple levels of education. So we just took the highest level of education for this one. So you can see of the respondents, 0.7% on the doctorate. I think that was like somewhere around 1 to 3, but it is in the report if you'd like the exact numbers. And so associate degree was, I think there's a good distribution here. If you're not looking at the doctorate, right, a good distribution between these. And then unreported were those that didn't answer that question. Oops, sorry. Employment status was very interesting to me and exciting because there were already those employed in technology prior to their academic program. They're already 22%. So people were coming in already employed in technology, working towards a cybersecurity degree. And this is very helpful for them because it helps them achieve maybe advancement in their career, promotion, or potentially transitioning from some other type of role, maybe IT help desk, into cybersecurity. Overall, they were, as their outcome, after graduation, 72% were employed either in cybersecurity or technology. And the reason I went with this approach rather than saying purely cybersecurity, in my dissertation study in 2023, I found that a lot of students said they were not in a cybersecurity role, but they were doing cybersecurity work roles based on the NIST framework. And I thought, well, how can you be doing all of this cybersecurity work, but you don't think you're working in cybersecurity? So I approached this question a little bit differently this time and said cybersecurity or technology. And it was very awesome to see that by the time people graduated and finished school in a cybersecurity program, there were 72%. If you look at other studies, for people coming out of an academic program and achieving their goal of going into their field of study. So let's say, biology or something else, math or something else, that number is much lower. So out of centers of academic excellence, we are achieving the goal much higher than other fields of study. So for those employed in another field, 7.5%, some of the feedback here was that they couldn't get into cyber. They just had not been able to achieve that role, or that getting into cyber was a pay cut. So they hadn't switched into that transition. I did have the same problem when I finished my master's degree at Cal Poly. So I'll start here with, I went to school at University of La Verne. I also did a little bit of University of Phoenix because I was an online student at the time. University of La Verne at the time was much more on ground, not as much online as they are now. That's a Southern California school. They're also a center of academic excellence, exciting. And I also went to Cal Poly Pomona, which is a center of academic excellence, for my master's degree, and Dakota State University for my PhD. So all centers of academic excellence, very cool. I've worked at many centers of academic excellence teaching as well, but my challenge was that I was working full time, finished my master's degree, and it would be a setback to go into cyber at that point because I had so many years in my field. I was working in technology, but it was much more focused on software development, and I was helping facilitate many security aspects of the software development because I was the manager and I was a QA and tester. So I was helping to describe what should happen with cybersecurity. I was helping when we had a HIPAA violation, people accessed our system that shouldn't. A very plain URL, they just typed a different order number way back in the day when that was very easy. So this is why I saw a lot of people said they weren't employed in cybersecurity as an outcome. It would be interesting if there was some way as faculty we could help those that couldn't achieve that goal. Not sure what those solutions might be, but maybe somebody can do a report on that. Me, myself, I would love to. Previously employed versus never employed, I thought was important. So these students were continuing in the previously employed, they had been working, but now they were re-educating, maybe reskilling into some other component of maybe going into cybersecurity from another field. So when I say previously employed, that means they are not currently employed, they're in school. And then never employed, they're still in school, they had not even started their employment. And then some preferred not to answer. So very interesting information when comparing and contrasting to other fields of study. So these are the top 10 NICE work roles based on the responses. So if you add up these total responses, you'll say, hey, this doesn't add up to 281 or even any number lower than that. The reason for that is we allowed students to tag up to 15 work roles that they had worked in for each of their jobs. So we asked them about their past 5 jobs and said, hey, tell us the work roles that you have done. And so this is something that somebody could do another study on to say, what's that trajectory look like? What does a student switch from as they transition between work roles? Do they kind of have a thread of maybe 1 or 2 work roles that they continue to do as they promote or move or advance through their career? And then do they have some that are more entry level and then some that are more advanced as they move up? I was very pleased to see that these were similar to the 2019 study, but that some of them had moved up in the rankings like vulnerability analysis and other things that we know are very important in cybersecurity that will help keep us defended. And then the incident response one definitely moved up significantly. And so if you'd like to do kind of a cross comparison, you can look at the 2019 study and see how those were different. That study has a similar chart like this. So what are those extracurricular activities that we're seeing across the CAEs and that students believe have impacted them most throughout to achieve a career in cybersecurity? Hands-on labs, by far, even throughout interviews and discussing with students, hands-on labs by far was the most important aspect of their academic program that they said got them the job. This also was threaded with the mentor advising component because they said that they were speaking with faculty and others in industry or using competitions as a way. So this was outside of the classroom, not only in your classroom. So if you are currently studying cyber and only facilitating hands-on activities through assignments, please add this to sort of your bonus on your education plan, right? How can you get more hands-on labs? I know John Sands, Moraine Valley, they use NetLab, we're using NetLab, but oftentimes students don't realize that those remote labs, maybe through a publisher like Cengage or something, are accessible beyond those assignments. And sometimes you can make up your own assignment in those sort of sandbox environments. You don't have to only flow through the exact assignment as it's written in the lab. So keep that in mind that you can use those lab areas outside of the classroom as well, generally. I don't mean after the class ends, but during the class you could do that. So course preparation for industry certification, obviously being very important and critical. As I mentioned, many students coming out of a bachelor's degree are saying, hey, I also need certification. How do I achieve that? Now, much of the curriculum is aligned. I'm talking 2013 through 2018 is when a lot of students were telling me that. I have already remodeled and refashioned my curriculum at Coastline. As soon as I came, I knew that was an important component and did that right away. So many of you are probably already aligned here. And students need to be looking at industry certification, and we'll talk about which ones in just a moment. Mentoring and advising, important here. This is not only done through your faculty. You want to think about and consider ways to talk to others in industry. And that doesn't always have to mean some ongoing mentor, right? You don't have to solicit a bunch of people to say, hey, can you mentor me, for the next 5 years while I'm going to school? You can ask different questions. You can come to webinars. You can listen to people. Advising isn't always directly to you and with you one-on-one. It can be in group sessions. It can be through webinars. So considering that you're here for NCyTE's webinar, I think you're already off to a really great start. It's very amazing. Not everybody takes that opportunity to find ways to hear more about cybersecurity. Internships. This was also closely related with apprenticeships. In California, we are definitely trying harder to integrate apprenticeships, differences for internships and apprenticeships. Just a quick note on that. Internships can be paid, unpaid, they can be short-term. Many people think of a summer internship as common, I think, in the United States now to think of internships that way, but they can be at any point in time, they can be any duration, any number of hours per week. Whereas an apprenticeship is much more structured, usually has some competencies that it'll be based on. The student has to be working in that field, not simply working at a company that does that work, but they need to be employed doing the activities of, say, cybersecurity. And it has a duration sometimes of 2,000 hours or competency-based, where an employer will say, yes, the person achieved these competencies and they're done in 6 to 8 months. So if you look into those things, don't only consider internships, look for apprenticeships as well. I think the more that people look for them and talk about them, the more that they can happen. So employers start to say, hey, I should be doing this, because they haven't quite all caught on to the bandwagon of apprenticeship. They do like internship for its more loose structure, I'll say. So networking and social events, this includes student clubs. This can include going to, say, like your local chapter of ISACA or ISC2 or a DEF CON local chapter if you can find one. In Southern California, we have quite a few. You can look at the DEF CON website, very, very highly regarded conference that happens every year. And guess where? Las Vegas, right? That's where I'm at. So look at those networking and social events that you can go to and network with your peers as well, because if they're planning to be in cybersecurity careers, you never know, they might be hiring, or you might be hiring and looking for somebody that you know what their program was like, and then you might want to hire from your school as well. And then part-time employment and on-the-job training were other ways. This was big in certain states. In Hawaii, for example, and North Dakota, I saw a lot of students who had achieved part-time employment at their school and had a lot of on-the-job training requirements based on their curriculum. So this is different in every state. In California, it's very difficult. We're super competitive. In our county alone, there are 9 community colleges. There's 3 million people. So the traffic is very dense and it's tough to get those entry-level jobs. So look at remote websites, use AI, not free AI, but use, if you could get access to paid AI to look for any sort of part-time employment that can help you get into cyber, super beneficial. So these were the top extracurricular activities that students mentioned. There were 14 choices, all the way ranging down to cyber camps and things like that. In the report, it has all of those if you wanted to see them in order of what students said were most beneficial to them. So certifications earned during the academic program, as I mentioned, there were some that students mentioned in their top, and I felt that Security Plus was going to be threaded throughout. We're seeing it on CyberSeek anyway. We know that Security Plus has been something that employers are looking for, and there are a lot of people out there with Security Plus. This is common in the community colleges to offer programs that are aligned with CompTIA. So it makes sense that there were many earned during the academic program. What Coastline does for faculty out there who want to hear about this, or students that want to hear about this, so you could look for this, is we not only offer alignment with CompTIA exams, we also offer the voucher. So the voucher is free. In a student's perspective, it's almost like getting the class for free because the voucher is the same cost oftentimes as the tuition that we offer at Coastline, which is $46 a month. So look at your school, look to see if you can find the academic pricing if you're going to pay for this on your own. CompTIA has an academic store, and you can get a reduced save about 30 to 40% on an exam, so you don't pay full price if you are a student with an EDU account. So Security Plus was very high on this list, which is great because I think with Security Plus and a degree or certificate, you're much more likely to get employed in cyber. So next one, again, we see Security Plus was high from the perspective. I know it's not the highest if you're comparing it to other certifications, but it was the highest one of a single type of certificate achieved post-program. So not only were students focused on it during the program, and then the other subset focused after. And we're seeing again CompTIA and Network Plus. And I believe that these are due to the need that employers are seeking them and the students go after them. There are many others. If you wanted to take a look at what other certifications were listed, many of them were like AWS, Cisco, and things like that. And when I was speaking with the students during the interview, that tended to be from their employer wanting them to achieve a specific certification. So if you go look at those other certifications, that's probably not what's going to necessarily get you employed. Look at jobs in your market, see what can help you. Security Plus is commonly the one that's the most beneficial in addition to your degree certificate. So what were the effects of those practical assignments on getting employment? So we asked, hey, you have this employment in cybersecurity or technology. What did you think of your practical assignments having that impact? And the most were obviously on the moderate and major effect. And we saw that in the other slide where hands-on labs was the first top from extracurricular standpoint. So this was the effect of practical assignments from the classroom on the employment position. So you need to complete your practical assignments in order to get a job, right? In order to compete in to play in cyber competitions. So what was the impact of education on employment? And I think this is also telling, and it's probably not surprising at this point after all of the data throughout, but most students said that there was either a significant or very significant contribution of their education on getting employed in cyber. So it isn't as easy to self-study as, say, it was maybe 15 years ago. It was a lot easier back then. If you were already working in IT, you could sort of self-study on some cyber and then get a job in cyber. But now the expectations are a little bit different, that you'll have some formal education and certification behind you. So what's the effects totally of the academic contribution? How did you get impacted if you were already, say, working in technology? What occurred? Or if you weren't working in technology, what else happened? Increase in salary was very high. That was interesting during the interview because they would hint at it, but not necessarily want me to tag it. So during interviews, what I was doing is following the same flow of the survey and tagging things for them where they could see it shared on screen, very similar to these slides. And they would say, well, and even if it was like $1 or $2, they didn't necessarily tag that. So I believe this number may be higher on those that didn't really see it quite that way. They were probably looking at a much, they wanted a significant bump to match what CyberSeek's numbers. Back then, CyberSeek used to have annual salaries, another great benefit. I don't know why they took that away, and I still intend to ask. Promotion was another, so 28% said that they got a promotion or hired into technology. Career change, this one was fun. Some changed completely from different types of roles and switching over to cyber. Moving from a lead to an expert, say. So this was also from a sort of technical to expert role, and then advancing to leadership. And so different impacts that, contribution of their academic career. And then from the concluding remarks and total of the report, the CAE-CD program is obviously contributing qualified professionals. We know this, and it's nice to see something that gives us this evidence through speaking with students. An emphasis on support from students' perspective, what they asked for in their, I had a free-form comment area, and also during the interviews, I accepted comments as well. And so what they said is that they received a lot of support from faculty. Those extracurriculars helped. The certifications helped them advance or move, change positions into different cybersecurity and technology roles. They also expressed more interest in more faculty support. So many said that that was critical to them getting the job in cyber, and others on the end of the spectrum who had not yet been employed said that they would like to have more faculty support. And then on-the-job training was critical. They recommended for others to take advantage of on-the-job training whenever possible. So volunteering, going for internships, apprenticeships, that's what they recommended. And those that were already in those types of situations said that that's how they got their job, was because they had already done that and they networked through. And those that didn't have that said, hey, I suggest for you, go do that if you're starting your academic journey. And then the ongoing barrier to employment, continuing to be that problem of lack of work experience. So they weren't able to get employed because they didn't have any experience. We do hear this from many students as they're trying. So I think that, in my opinion, getting any job is helpful, and then trying to get into cybersecurity as opposed to trying to get an entry-level job in cyber with zero background ever anywhere, right? Like, go be a cashier somewhere, go experience customer service in some way to try to do something to have on your resume so that you aren't starting simply with a bachelor's degree and 18 certifications. So I will also say that you can have too many certifications if you don't have work experience. So take that into consideration, that you don't need to study for too many industry certifications rather than going to get a job. That would be your better bet, is that balance. Looking at that cybersecurity formula, definitely for balance. So here we are at the end. I think we're doing pretty good on timing, but maybe have some questions. So for those of you who are interested in staying for those questions, I'm happy to stay on as well, so we don't have to cut right at 10. For those of you who have some other meeting to transition to, please send me your questions by email. Feel free to take this down, connect with me on LinkedIn. I believe Mike will drop those questions in the chat. I'm sorry, those contact information in the chat. And then the alumni study is on the website, on the NCyTE website, as well as the 2019 study. You can navigate around. Once you get to the 2025 study, you could easily navigate around to the 2019 study as well. And then here are some QR codes if you wanted to grab those up really quick to get to the slides or the report, screenshot those, look at them later. I will stop talking and open for questions.
I also had a question around, you didn't mention cyber competitions as supporting credentials.
I did mention it in the cybersecurity employment formula. I also have it in the report. It just wasn't in the top 5 or 6 or whatever was in my top list, but that is how you get extracurricular hands-on, I believe. That's very helpful. But also, if we jump back to the formula, where competitions can help. I did mention them a couple times throughout, but where it helps here in the formula is both practical experience and people skills. So I think that if I have a whole separate presentation, I'd love to come to NCyTE and talk about just the employment formula and talk to people about what they see and where they see different things fit. I did this talk at EdCidCon, but from a practical experience standpoint, the hands-on experience in the classroom is typically a little bit less critical thinking applied and a little bit more conceptual or theoretical, like how do I get through this lab, where competitions help you gain the practical experience of the critical thinking, the time constraints, working with teams, and then again on the problem solving and teamwork side of people skills. So a little bit threaded throughout. Sorry, I didn't talk about it as directly because it just didn't happen to fit in this. Sorry for scrolling. It didn't happen to fit in this top extracurricular activities directly, but students did say they experienced their hands-on through competitions too. But it was a
With
separate item.
so did you? This is a question I have: is that uh, did you have veterans or transitioning military in your uh,
Efficient.
in your survey, and also if you did,
Competitions are contests where people
well,
or groups try to do better than others.
uh, anyway, and what impact would that have? Is because they have a little bit of advantage if they're trying to go to work for a DOW contractor with that security clearance already, if they have one.
During the interviews, I did find that information, but we did not record it for this. We had not asked for that segment. It is coming up much more now than it was back then. When we modeled this survey, we tried to closely mimic the 2019 study and may have left off things like veteran status or veteran dependent or other statuses that may have helped us to segment those out. For this, we didn't do that. In the next study, if NCyTE commissions one, I'd highly recommend that we have a broader group to talk with someone like yourself so that we can consider those things. But I didn't ask that specifically, sorry.
Yeah, well, I've been interested because I'm working with my grandson who's in cyber command and is going to be transitioning out. So, uh, they're all the whole group that he works with are all concerned about how they can get a job,
Mm-hmm.
and they're cyber they're basically cyber rangers. So they've gone through 41 weeks of cyber command training when they're ATI. So they need help is all I can say. So maybe that would be something I'll talk to Michelle about. But
Yeah. And what I was thinking is we should do this study like at least every 2 years as opposed to waiting, because then faculty will be in the habit of retaining alumni information and we can get a bigger group and then we can ask different questions. We can alternate. Like if you look at ISC2 and the different workforce studies they do, they sort of alternate around and do what's maybe popular information requested at the time. So like they have a gender outcomes and different other groupings where they focus on ethnicity and things that were important at a given time. And then they'll keep threading that throughout the rest of their studies so they'll do one that's very topical like that. So we could do one that's focused on veterans first. And then the next time we repeat the study, just put that into this study as well.
yeah, okay. I know there's a lot of people. We went over time, but if you want to stay on, we can talk a little bit more as questions. There's another question around that. Is there any correlation between the Cybersecurity Centers of Excellence and the ABET accredited cybersecurity programs?
So community colleges, I think only more recently in the more recent years could be ABET accredited. So centers of academic excellence range from 2-year schools through doctorate program, and ABET's a little bit different, and not everybody has to be ABET accredited. So I'm sure there's some correlation, but it's not as direct as every CAE is an ABET accredited school.
Well, I think in December we had the ABET folks do a presentation, and they do have something on certification. Uh, so you can go back to NCyTE's website and look at the December 2025 presentation, and you can learn a little bit more about those what ABET's doing in that area. Along with there is a cybersecurity for associate's degree at ABET. I was on that committee.
Right. That I want to say that came up maybe in 2022, sort of. So it's available, but it's not as direct of a correlation, I guess, because not everybody has that just yet.
Yeah, Michelle's on there. She has a comment, I think.
Hi,
Yeah,
Michelle.
thanks. Sorry, I was joining late because of another meeting conflict, but thank you, first of all, Toby, for doing this presentation. And then just on the ABET question. So my understanding when we went into that December meeting, there were only 7 institutions who currently had that ABET accreditation for the cyber program that they offer that for. So there were only 7, and I think CAE through NSA's designation has been kind of the de facto accreditation for the nation. And the one that folks want to achieve, also because it's federally funded. Right, with the mentor services, whereas you're paying ABET for your accreditation if you go that route.
Right. And then I know that Lynn Clark hosted ABET to come to the CAEs to talk about how they might start aligning some of the criteria to make it a little easier for us to achieve both. But I know that Lynn retired shortly after that, and I'm not sure where PMO from NSA Program Management Office, where they went with it. I know many of us would love to do that as well, but it is another sort of achievement, right? It takes resources and time in order to get there. So yeah, definitely not as direct, I guess, to answer the original question, not as direct of a correlation between CAE and ABET. And like Michelle said, many of us have focused on the CAE designation initially. And now we have this cyber AI. So that's amazing too, right? Already a possibility for AI designation or at least validation at this point. And Coastline is one of the first 7.
I think from an academic institution perspective, funding, right? Funding that ABET accreditation,
Right.
and then engaging all the folks at your institution who have to be part of that process. So
Yeah, it's a lot more, I think. The other thing is that if you are a CAE, you open up some grant opportunities through NSA and whatever whatever the changes are around TOW and whatnot. But I think that's an advantage. If you look at, like, when you're talking about trying to get certifications and whatnot, one of the grants that came out of this NSA was the Cyber Skills to Work. So that was where they actually took a lot of people that were wanting to transition into cyber, and through certification courses and whatnot, they were able to get that. So that was through the CAE community and CAE representatives. So those are, I think that's an advantage of being a CAE. It opens up all those opportunities. Plus the CAE community itself is a resource that is unbelievable, because we all collaborate with each other. There's not competition so much, it's collaboration.
Definitely. What are you doing and how can I do it too, right?
Yeah. Mary has a hand up. What happened to her? There
I'm
she is.
wondering.
Her voice is off.
Sorry.
There we
Yeah,
go.
I just couldn't get the lower bar to come up on my phone. I was more curious, kind of to follow up on that ABET question, because we are an ABET accredited community college. There's only 3 maybe of us. I'm wondering if any of the 4-year schools on the call have seen employers, I guess, insist on that accreditation. Because we have not. And so that was one of the reasons to go for it. The other was articulation to the 4-year schools. So just kind of curious if there is anybody on the call that could answer that.
I'm sorry, which accreditation, Mary?
The ABET accreditation
Oh.
in cybersecurity, if any of the 4-year schools that have it have employers that are asking for it or insisting on it.
Stephen, I can answer from GW's perspective.
Okay.
At GW, the computer science department that has the majority, but not all, the cybersecurity degrees, decided to step away from ABET because the industry that we feed into as a 4-year and a PhD program were not asking for it. So there's one data point for you just this year. The entire university is anxious and right now is involved in an ABET accreditation program, but the CS department decided to step away because industry did not ask for it. And of course, this is Washington, D.C., where we have a lot of military vendors and consultants and so on.
Okay. Any other questions for Tobi? Just raise your hand, come off mute. Okay. Well,
It looked like
Tobi,
there was a question about the cyber AI validated program of study.
I was just trying to answer that in the chat real quick, but if the person would like to ask more about it, I can explain briefly, and then you can tell me if you had a different take on whatever I said in the moment might have made more sense on a certain slide. But cyber AI in this context is the validated program of study from the NSA Program Management Office. They do a distinction. It's not really a designation. It's very similar to the way the CAE for cyber defense is done from an application standpoint, where we have to have our knowledge units aligned, so our curriculum is aligned, and we're doing all of these components. But cyber AI in this context meant both AI for cybersecurity and security for AI. So that's what I meant by it. But you'll hear it all over. Cyber AI could mean anything in different contexts, but that's what it means to us from a CAE.
Yeah, and I dropped the link to the
Thank you.
The documents for all of the different designations and this particular program of study. My understanding is that at some point it will become a designation. I think they're moving in that direction. So
we are starting that steering committee. I am on that steering committee. So for cyber AI, I'm so excited. It's going to be so awesome. So we have currently for students, we have a CAE designation for cyber defense, for cyber research and cyber operations, and soon we'll have one for cyber AI.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, well, thanks, Tobi. This has really been great. I think we had a great interaction too with some of these questions, and we look forward to everyone meeting up with us next month with John Sands and the AI and developing curriculum. As I mentioned before, that was he's got some very interesting stories to tell about how his what he's done in his workshops and how you can develop curriculum through his AI tools. And anyway, have a good weekend and a good week, and thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tobi.